Raj, meet your new partner.
Action movies used to feel like they smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and bad life decisions. In 1987, Warner Brothers released Lethal Weapon, a tough buddy cop movie that came to theaters uncensored and was definitely not made to be fun for the whole family. It was directed by Richard Donner and written by a then-unknown Shane Black, and the film was powered by grief, anger, and just enough dark humor to stop everything from falling apart. It starred Mel Gibson as Martin Riggs, a suicidal and unpredictable cop who had nothing left to lose, and Danny Glover as Roger Murtaugh, a family man who spends 4 movies saying he is too old for this job while still running straight through explosions. Anyway, it looked like a regular cop movie, but it completely changed the genre instead. Here are 15 strange facts about Lethal Weapon that show just how close this movie came to becoming something very, very different. And stay until number 15, because the script that made a 23-year-old earn $250,000 almost ended up in the trash. Now, before we begin, do not forget to like, subscribe, and support this video. It helps YouTube show this to more classic movie fans just like you. Now, let's start the countdown with...
Number 1. Danny Glover was not too old at all. Roger Murtaugh spent 4 movies constantly saying that he was too old for this job.
I'm too old for this.
But the math tells a different story. When Lethal Weapon was filmed in 1986, Murtaugh was celebrating his 50th birthday, a moment that the script treated like a death sentence for action heroes. Danny Glover, the actor playing this supposedly very old cop, was only 40 years old, just 10 years older than Mel Gibson, his supposedly young and reckless partner. Hollywood added some gray to his hair, gave him a house loan and a minivan full of kids, and convinced audiences that he was only 1 foot chase away from needing a hip replacement. The real joke is how well it actually worked. I'm Too Old for This first appeared in that original film and quickly spread everywhere. The line ended up lasting longer than the movie series itself. It became a common way to describe burnout, tiredness, and the feeling of, I did not sign up for this. People started saying it at age 30, and then even at 25. It was basically a meme before memes even had a name. Just pure, concentrated, I'm done energy that connected with people across different generations. Number 2. Riggs was supposed to die. Martin Riggs was never meant to live long enough to be in a sequel. In fact, he was never even meant to make it to the end credits. In the original version, Lethal Weapon was not planned to start a movie series. It was written as a tragedy. Riggs begins the story as a suicidal and broken man with nothing left to lose, and ends as a man who finally finds peace by giving his life to save someone else. Shane Black pushed this idea even further in his early draft for the sequel called Play Dirty. The script showed Riggs being violently killed after the final fight, including a goodbye video that he had recorded ahead of time, knowing that he would not survive. And the studio wanted nothing to do with that idea. The producers completely rejected the ending.
Hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no.
Director Richard Donner eventually filmed 2 different versions, one where Riggs dies and one where he survives. Test audiences strongly preferred the ending where he lived, and the darker version was quietly locked away in a studio vault somewhere. That creative disagreement left lasting tension. Black's original 140-page script was heavily changed, with uncredited work by Jeffrey Boehm to reduce the violence and focus more on the buddy cop relationship. Black, angry about the change in tone and the decision to keep Riggs alive, left the franchise completely after the second movie.
I'm out of here.
Number 3. The fights were trained, not faked. Action movies in the 1980s usually treated fight scenes like dance routines with punches. Lethal Weapon wanted the audience to feel every hit and every bruise. Director Richard Donner had no interest in flashy Hollywood-style choreography. He wanted Riggs to feel truly dangerous. That meant training the actors in fighting styles that most audiences had barely heard of. Mel Gibson and Gary Busey learned a mix of techniques that were meant to make the violence feel real and uncomfortable. Capoeira, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and jailhouse rock, a fighting style that actually started in American prisons. Busey also added Taekwondo to the mix, and later said that this film started his lifelong passion for martial arts. Gibson reportedly trained 4 hours a day for 6 weeks, followed by months of practice to make sure everything felt natural. The goal was to make it look like two men who truly wanted to destroy each other. The scene even includes a triangle choke, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu submission move that most American audiences did not recognize until the UFC made it popular years later. Number 4. The rooftop jump was almost completely real. That rooftop jump where Riggs handcuffs himself to a suicidal man and throws both of them off the building was not CGI. It could not be, because CGI in 1987 was still trying to figure out how to make a simple cube spin without looking strange. So they did it the traditional way, by actually jumping off buildings and hoping the calculations were correct. Professional stuntmen performed the fall, and no, they were not truly handcuffed together in the air, because that is how you turn a stunt into a tragedy. They used special plastic handcuffs that broke apart the moment they jumped, then held hands on the way down to make the scene look real. In a strange way, it was almost romantic, but also terrifying. Gibson, being Gibson, was not happy just watching from the side. He insisted on stepping off the edge himself for certain shots. They hid wires and safety harnesses under his clothes, but he still willingly stepped off a building. Number 5. The movie was dedicated to a legend. Lethal Weapon's action scenes were not created by some intern with a green screen and a Red Bull addiction. They were made the old-fashioned way, with real people, real gravity, and real danger. The film's ending credits include a dedication to Dar Robinson, described as one of the greatest stuntmen in the movie industry. For once, Hollywood was not exaggerating or just praising someone after their death. Over 13 years, Robinson set 21 world records for high falls and other death-defying stunts. Robinson worked as stunt coordinator on Lethal Weapon, doubled for Mel Gibson during filming, and personally trained actress Jackie Swanson for the film's opening high fall, which she performed herself. Because in 1986, "We'll fix it in post" meant adding credits, not removing physics. Then came November 21, 1986. Shortly after finishing the film, Robinson was killed in a motorcycle accident while shooting an indie comedy called $1 Million Mystery during a routine drive-by shot. The kind of moment nobody includes in a safety meeting. Sometimes action movies cost more than budgets and egos. Sometimes they cost everything. Number 6. The soundtrack that sounds like 2 a.m. loneliness. Most action movies in 1987 used synthesizers and drums to score their explosions, but Lethal Weapon hired a blues guitarist and a saxophone player and told them, "Make it sad." Composer Michael Kamen brought in Eric Clapton and jazz saxophonist David Sanborn, creating a soundtrack that had no real business being in a buddy cop movie.
That makes your life turn cold.
The instrumentation was intentional. Clapton's guitar represented Riggs, and it was not meant to sound victorious or heroic. Sanborn's saxophone represented Murtaugh, warmer and more stable, like the musical version of a man who pays his bills on time and still worries about his daughter's dating life.
High five.
Where Riggs spiraled, Murtaugh grounded him. The two sounds moved around each other like the partnership itself. It was uneasy, mismatched, but somehow it still worked. The result gave Lethal Weapon an emotional backbone that most action films did not even try to build. Number 7. The crossover that nobody planned. Sometimes Hollywood carefully builds a cinematic universe, and sometimes history just creates one without anyone noticing. Early in Lethal Weapon, Murtaugh shares some backstory about his Vietnam service. He mentions serving as a lieutenant in the 173rd Airborne Brigade and brings up the Ai Drang Valley in 1965. His friend, Hunsaker, saved his life by taking a bayonet to the lungs. It is standard character development, just a few lines to make the grumpy cop feel more real and three-dimensional. Nobody really thought about it again. But then, 15 years later, Mel Gibson made a movie called We Were Soldiers. Gibson played Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, the real-life commander at the Battle of Ai Drang. Same valley, same year, same war. Which means, if you look at it in a fun way, Martin Riggs was technically Roger Murtaugh's commanding officer just a couple of decades earlier and with a lot more helicopters. The timeline actually fits, and fans have enjoyed this accidental crossover ever since. They imagine a universe where the reckless partner who cannot follow orders once served in Vietnam as the man outranking the cop who would later spend 4 movies telling him to calm down. Hollywood spent the next 20 years trying to build cinematic universes with post-credit scenes and massive budgets, but this one happened with a single line of dialogue and a 15-year gap.
Number 8. Gibson and Glover had instant chemistry. Casting decisions usually involve months of auditions, studio politics, and executives pretending they understand chemistry.
No guns, no jiu-jitsu, just bring him down.
Roger.
What?
10-4.
Richard Donner skipped all of that. He flew Mel Gibson in from Sydney and Danny Glover in from Chicago and put them in a room with a script, basically telling them, impress me or go home. Within minutes, Gibson and Glover started bouncing off each other like they had been working together for years. The timing just clicked. Donner later said he felt like he was watching the movie come alive in real time, which is either directing genius or just incredible luck, and it is probably a bit of both. By the end of the reading, there was nothing left to debate. Donner turned to the executives and said, let's go make the movie. Casting director Marion Doherty supported the pairing, and Donner trusted chemistry over Hollywood's usual process. He understood something most studios forget. The relationship was the movie. Everything else was just explosions and background detail. 5 minutes in a room, 2 actors who clicked, 4 movies, and $1 billion later, that gamble looks pretty good. Okay, we are halfway through the video, so now it is time for a quick pause, because if this is bringing back memories of action heroes who actually look tired, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel more than internal affairs helps anyone in these movies. So let's get back to the weirdness with
Number 9. Gary Busey was cast to be truly terrifying. Casting a villain in an action movie usually means finding someone the hero can outsmart by the third act. Lethal Weapon wanted someone who made you genuinely unsure if the hero was going to walk out alive. The producers had one requirement: find an actor who looked like he could actually kill Mel Gibson. By the time Busey walked into his audition, he had dropped 60 pounds and looked like he had been preparing for a war that nobody else knew about. During the audition, he reportedly snapped a pencil with his bare hands without raising his voice, then held eye contact with the room until everyone became uncomfortable. That was the whole idea, and it was enough. Director Richard Donner wanted a villain who felt like a real threat, and Busey delivered that completely. On set, he stayed in character between takes, which is either impressive commitment or very unsettling, depending on how close he was standing. The role came at the right time. Busey had already earned an Oscar nomination for the Buddy Holly story, then saw his career slow down. Mr. Joshua changed that overnight, turning him into Hollywood's go-to actor for "this guy might actually hurt someone." Number 10. This was always a Christmas movie. Everyone loves arguing about whether Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Meanwhile, Lethal Weapon was sitting in the corner the whole time, covered in tinsel and wondering why nobody noticed. The film does not just hint at the holidays, it hits you in the face with them. The opening credits rolled a Jingle Bell Rock, immediately followed by drugs, a woman falling off a balcony, and enough emotional damage to fill a therapist's schedule through February. Merry Christmas, everyone! Writer Shane Black loved using Christmas as a pressure cooker. The forced cheer makes the loneliness even louder, and nobody feels that loneliness more than Martin Riggs, grieving his wife and falling deeper into self-destruction, while the rest of the world hangs stockings and argues about food recipes. The film ends on December 25th, not with an explosion, but with Riggs showing up to Christmas dinner at the Murtaugh house, handing over the bullet he had been saving for himself. It is subtle in a heavy-handed way, but it works. He gets a seat at the table, a plate of food, and something that looks like hope. Action, explosions, family trauma, and redemption over dinner all together. That is not a movie that happens during Christmas. That is a Christmas movie.
Number 11. Bruce Willis almost played Riggs. Martin Riggs almost belonged to a completely different action star. Before Mel Gibson ever stepped into the role, Lethal Weapon was offered to Bruce Willis. He read Shane Black's script, decided it was too violent for his taste, and turned it down, which is funny in hindsight, considering Willis would spend the next 30 years getting shot at, blown up, and thrown off buildings for a living. But here is where it gets strange. Gibson had already turned down Die Hard, so Willis said no to Riggs, and Gibson said no to McClane, and somehow both actors ended up in the exact roles that defined their careers. Anyway, Hollywood accidentally shuffled the deck and still dealt 2 perfect hands. The links between these franchises go deeper than casting what-ifs.
Both films had strong involvement from Joel Silver and were scored by Michael Kamen, giving them shared creative DNA even as their tones moved in different directions. There is even a long-running Hollywood story that Gibson's Beretta 92F in Lethal Weapon was the same prop Willis later used in Die Hard, because apparently Silver believed in recycling before it was cool. The crossover did not stop there either. The script that eventually became Die Hard with a Vengeance originally started as a possible Lethal Weapon sequel before being reworked for Willis. And in The Last Boy Scout, written by Shane Black and starring Willis, a kid is briefly seen watching Lethal Weapon on television, just in case the universe had not made the connection obvious enough. Number 12. There was also a TV series that imploded in 3 seasons. Because Hollywood never met a successful movie it did not want to stretch into 50 episodes and eventually ruin, Lethal Weapon got a TV adaptation in 2016.
Hey,
Bro,
are you available?
for what?
To kill the punk that's dating my daughter.
I'll make time for that.
Fox brought the franchise to weekly television, with Damon Wayans stepping into Murtaugh's sensible shoes and Clayne Crawford playing Riggs. Crawford leaned heavily into the unhinged wildcard energy that made the character famous. You could call it method acting, maybe even too method. By the end of Season 2 in 2018, Crawford was fired after reports of on-set behavior that made Martin Riggs seem emotionally stable in comparison. The production did something the movies never dared to do. They actually killed Riggs off permanently. To keep the show going, Fox brought in Sean William Scott as Wesley Cole, a former CIA operative with a calmer personality and presumably a much better HR record. The chemistry shift was obvious, and so was the drop in ratings. Audiences had signed up for Riggs and Murtaugh, not Murtaugh and some new guy. Then, Wayans announced he was leaving after Season 3, citing brutal 16-hour workdays and health concerns. At that point, the show had burned through both original leads and most of its audience's patience. Fox canceled it in May 2019 after 3 seasons. The TV version proved one thing the movies always understood: Lethal Weapon only works when the chaos stays inside the script. Number 13. Murtaugh was not written with a specific ethnicity in mind. Roger Murtaugh was never written as black. He also was not specifically written as white. He was written as tired and just hoping to make it to retirement without problems.
Morning, Roger. Here, have some coffee.
That's it. That's the entire character description. Nowhere in Shane Black's original script does Murtaugh's race come up, not even once. The character was defined by his age, his family, his bad knees, and his strong wish to stop getting shot at. Everything else was left open. When casting started, director Richard Donner, like most of Hollywood at the time, automatically imagined a white actor in the role. That assumption stayed in place until casting director Marion Doherty asked a simple question: "Did you see The Color Purple? What about Danny Glover?" Donner's first reaction was, "But he's black." Then he stopped and realized something important. Nothing in the script said Murtaugh could not be black. Donner later admitted that moment embarrassed him. "Here's Mr. Liberal," he said, pointing out his own blind spot. "What a great idea. I felt stupid. It changed how I think." So they did what should have been obvious from the beginning. They hired the best actor for the role, and he happened to be black. End of story. No big marketing push, no self-congratulation, just a casting director who saw something others missed, and a director honest enough to admit it. Number 14. The film featured one of Hollywood's first cell phones. Lethal Weapon did not just revive the buddy cop genre, it accidentally predicted the future while nobody was paying attention. During an early scene in Amanda Hunsaker's apartment, Murtaugh casually pulls out a portable cell phone.
Hello, honey.
He carries what looks like a briefcase that swallowed a telephone. This was a Radio Shack portable phone, often identified as the Model 1700 series, and the word portable is doing a lot of work here. The device weighed about 11 pounds and came with its own carrying case, battery pack, and a thick coiled cord. In 1987, most audiences had never seen anything like it outside of science fiction like Star Trek. And speaking of money, the unit cost around $3,000 at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that is firmly in you-could-buy-a-used-car-instead territory. Murtaugh using it so casually suggests either the LAPD had a massive equipment budget or he made some questionable financial choices. What makes the moment stand out is how little attention it gets. Director Richard Donner does not zoom in on it or have anyone react in surprise. It is just there, doing its job, quietly telling the audience that the future is closer than they think. Wall Street would later get most of the credit for the brick phone era, but Lethal Weapon got there first, months earlier, with no showboating. Number 15. The $250,000 script that changed Hollywood. Most 23-year-olds in 1985 were trying to figure out how to pay rent. Shane Black was busy accidentally creating the modern buddy cop genre and then throwing it in the trash. Black was fresh out of UCLA's screenwriting program with no credits, no agent, and no reason for anyone in Hollywood to return his calls. He had been mass mailing query letters to producers, the 1980s version of screaming into the void and hoping someone answers back. So he wrote Lethal Weapon. 6 weeks, one intense burst of writing driven by desperation and probably not enough sleep. A suicidal cop, a family man counting down to retirement, and enough violence to make a studio lawyer uncomfortable. When he finished, he read it, decided it was bad, and threw the script in the trash. His roommate pulled it out. The script eventually reached an agent who made a few calls, and within weeks, every studio in town wanted it. The bidding war was intense. Studios fought over it like the last parking spot in a mall in December. When it was over, Black walked away with $250,000. That's roughly $700,000 today for a first screenplay by a guy who had been licking stamps and hoping for a response just months earlier. The sale sent a shockwave through Hollywood. Studios realized an unknown writer with a strong spec script could actually demand serious money, and the spec script boom exploded. Writers struggling in obscurity suddenly started getting meetings, bidding wars became normal, and Black rode that wave straight to the top. The Last Boy Scout sold for $1.75 million in 1990. The Long Kiss Goodnight went for $4 million in 1994, the highest price ever paid for a spec script at the time. The writer who could not even get his query letters read became the highest-paid screenwriter in Hollywood within a decade, all because his roommate pulled something out of the trash. And that's it. 15 strange and wild facts about Lethal Weapon. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and share this with a friend who still says, "I'm too old for this," at least once a week. Until next time.